And so these values, though, I think everyone can agree that food is more than just like a pencil that we buy. Food has a lot of attributes and benefits that we want to be able to support simultaneously and hold together at the same time. So in this sense, in this movement of good food purchasing, those are clearly around individual health or health and nutrition, local economies. We want to drive as many of our regional producers and their businesses and their farms as possible, including M&WBE businesses. We care deeply, and so every speaker here has spoken about the attributes and the need to drive better food purchases by caring about the environment. And also, clearly, we know that in our food system, one of the biggest violators of labor challenges is the food system. So conditions around labor treatments and clearly also then around animal welfare. These are all 5 values that the simple purchase of food, you have an ability to impact. And what's our responsibility is to figure out how we can hold 2 or more at the same time. And I think what's been really interesting, and I know many in this room care deeply about all attributes of the food system, but a real, when we follow the data and we follow the science, and thanks to World Resources Institute that I know is here also, we know that when we care deeply about the carbon footprint of food and the attributes from the land use to the processing to the retail and ultimately getting it to us, that if we care also about local economies, we can't really do both at the same time, because even if we're buying something, let's say beef or dairy from New York, the ultimate environmental impact is somewhat the same, because the transportation emissions are only about 6% of the full emissions of the food. So we've been able to, in some ways, preference local economies, but we've actually been able to make a lot more progress when we talk about environmental sustainability. So you can go to the next slide. So here's what we've been able to do. And this is where it starts to get really, the rubber's hitting the road, when we start to identify
we've been able to, in some ways, preference local economies, but we've actually been able to make a lot more progress when we talk about environmental sustainability. Our friends in California
have done this for us. They've actually defined the metrics, the labels.
So here's what we've been able to do. And this is where it starts to get really, the rubber's hitting the road, when we start to identify. We've been able to, in some ways, preference local economies, but we've actually been able to make a lot more progress when we talk about environmental sustainability.
Have done this for us. They've actually defined the metrics, the labels.
So here's what we've been able to do. And this is where it starts to get really, the rubber's hitting the road.
And then I met our identify.
We've been able to, in some ways, preference local economies, but we've actually been able to make a lot more progress when we talk about environmental sustainability.
Have done this for us. They've actually defined the metrics, the labels.
So here's what we've been able to do. And this is where it starts to get really, the rubber's hitting the road. And then I met our identify. We've been able to, in some ways, preference local economies, but we've actually been able to make a lot more progress when we talk about environmental sustainability. Have done this for us. They've actually defined the metrics, the labels. So here's what we've been able to do. And this is where it starts to get really, the rubber's hitting the road. And then I met our identify. We've been able to, in some ways, preference local economies,
environment as well. So with that, I really want to thank the organizers of this. I want to appreciate the nudges and the encouragement to do a both and, to talk not just about changing diets, but also the need to really use our muscle and our skill to be able to environment farming as well. So with that, I really want to thank the organizers of this. I want to appreciate the nudges and the encouragement to do a both and, to demonstrate success using private dollars, but we'll be able to bring public dollars to bear. Thank you.
Excited about this next panel. It's actually about one of the organizations and alliances that got me into this work. We're going to be hearing from Christopher Gergen, the new CEO of Regenerative Organic Alliance, as well as Mike Farrell, a regenerative organic farmer. I'm really excited about Jessica Student at the Rodale Institute, as well as Alex Lunt from Armonia. And this is going to be a panel on how regenerative organic can scale. Over the last 2 years, this organization has built an incredible base, an incredible network, and now they're at that tipping point. And so, without anything further, Chris, please come to the stage, and everyone else as well.
Be able to pay attention to soil health, to social fairness, livable wages, and to animal welfare. Be able to pay attention to soil health, building blocks of the regenerative organic fairness, livable wages, are precisely those. Be able to pay attention to soil health, building blocks of the regenerative organic fairness, livable wages, soil health, building blocks of the regenerative farms paying livable wages, and are they taking care of the animals? And are we giving a very clear, open, transparent, and importantly third-party verified standard that we can give confidence to the marketplace to say the products and farms that are now regenerative organic certified are adhering to these practices. So if you had some of Michael's, for example, fantastic Wild Orchard matcha tea over lunch or got a chance to try that out, you can have confidence that he's exactly using these types of farming practices, right? No acres. And then importantly, we've got a number of about 19.5 million acres. And then importantly, we've got a number of brands that are starting to source this product. 19.5 million acres. Part of our conversation about how we get more demand generated. But we now got 250-ish brands, 19.5 million acres, more than 2,500 products that are sourcing this product and really being able to create a growth splash in the marketplace. So the real point of this conversation today is how can we meaningfully scale that? And of course, in 5 years, we've seen tremendous growth. In fact, if you look in the natural startups category, regenerative organic certified products are the fastest growing category in whole foods. So how can we meaningfully scale that? Of course, in 5 years, you see that we've seen tremendous growth by just basic spin data, unbelievable growth. The question is, how do we build at this moment towards something that is meaningfully more? And so the next is really the question is, what's our unbelievable growth? The question is, how do we build at this moment towards something that is meaningfully more? So the next is really the question is, what's our unbelievable growth? The question is, how do we build at this moment towards something that is meaningfully more? So the next systemically. So we recognize the fact that you can't actually just work on one piece of this equation. You actually have to work on the entire system for this to work in order for this to get to scale. So we need a meaningful amount of demand to be able to then create the pull strategy for more farmers to want to make the transition, because we know the 3 major barriers to transition are cost, knowledge, and market. Without a market, then they're not going to be willing to make the investment to be able to make that transition in the first place and access some of the knowledge that's out there. But if we can get more demand generated and we can get more supply to be able to meet that demand, and then we're able to capture on the back end what the impact of that transition has been from an environmental, economic, and health perspective, that we can then use that data through data-driven storytelling to then drive more demand, to then create more demand for that supply, strengthen more supply to be able to create more impact, to drive more demand. So that's really today's conversation, is how do we get this flywheel spinning? And fortunately, we've got an amazing panel to talk about this, about how do we get this flywheel spinning faster and faster, and how do we really get to what we think could be this critical tipping point in terms of transition to regenerative organic. So I'm going to kick it first to Jess to think about how do we think about this systemically. We've been having lots of conversations outside of CF, systemic change. Can you talk about, I guess, importantly, the relationship that you see from the Riddell Institute's perspective on what the relationship needs to be between demand and supply, and how do we meet that? How do we make that work even better?
Absolutely. So, bringing and introducing this flywheel concept is something that has been true to what the Institute has been working on for close to 8 decades. And it's really understanding that one piece or one system can't accelerate faster than the other, because it really is so symbiotic. And so a lot of what we are thinking about at the Institute is how are we driving knowledge and education through independent scientific research that is rooted and grounded in today's challenges, and being able to prove that regenerative organic practices do actually accelerate economic vitality for farmers. It increases human health outcomes for people, and also supports planetary health. And so thinking about that as our foundation, then we are looking at how we are supporting farmers through an education perspective, whether that's in workforce development as we're kind of training the next generation of regenerative organic farmers, or through our consultancy working hand in hand, foot in the soil with farmers in addressing the needs and the challenges that they're facing every single day, anywhere through their journey to ROC certification. So it's really meeting folks where they are, being deeply grounded and rooted in scientific research, and then being able to make sure that we are substantiating the claims that we're able to put forward.
Great. So we'll come back to the idea of substantiation and everything else like that. But then, Alex, bringing you into the conversation. So first, I think it would be helpful for you to be able to explain a little bit more about what Armonia's investment thesis is. And then as we think about this whole question about how do we bring more capital to bear to make this flywheel spinning, how do you think about that?
It's nice to see you all. Armonia is my family's family office. My dad started Armonia in 2007 with really the ambition of restoring the health to our food system from the soil up. We didn't define that until many years later as the kind of formal mission, but it's always been part of how we've looked at things, and the soil piece of that is really critical. When we started, we had 3 components to the strategy. It was land, brands, and ecosystem. And I suppose the way that we have approached this movement and the system's change, because it does require the whole system, is as catalytic capital providers, thinking about what is the role that we need to play as capital providers to grow this. And so we needed to understand what was happening on the land. So we have a farm, we have ranches. Our farm was the first ROC grain farm in the country, and which we're really proud of. We had looked at various other kind of practices and certifications before that. Organic was always going to be part of it. We looked at biodynamic, but there wasn't really a market and a premium for that. ROC was really fascinating because not only did it align with the practices and our values there, but regenerative is picking up, and like you said, and it's with partners like some of the people in this room, Taylor, who we'll hear from later, and the brands, this is where the brands come in, that create that demand and create the market and the awareness for the practices on the land that you start to kind of build this thing. And then the ecosystem side is critical. That's where policy, regulation, nonprofits, awareness campaigns, all of that can play a really important role. And now I've completely forgotten your question, but hopefully I touched on some of it.
Because I think you're now putting a lot of things on the table that we're going to start to unpack along the way. But let me bring Michael's voice into this from the farmer's perspective. Because first, I think it would be helpful for you to explain a little bit what you do with forest farmers and sort of the business model that you all have. But then if you could specifically speak to the idea of the demand side of the equation and how you think about that as a farmer, and what do you think will help to inspire more farmers to be able to make that transition to become regenerative organic?
Sure, and thanks for having me. I did tear my Achilles, that's why I'm here with the boot.
That's actually not why you're here.
No.
That's why you are sitting there with that boot.
Yeah, I'm here because I love the regenerative agriculture movement. That's what got me to want to become ROC certified. We think we did it 3 or 4 years ago. We're already organic. What we do at Forest Farmers, we have 10,000 acres of forest in New York and Vermont, and we primarily harvest the saps of maple, birch, beech, and walnut trees. It's wild forest. And we already take really good care of our people, and the animals in our forest have the best life of any animal. So like animal welfare, all that is already there. We decided to get regenerative organic certified because to support the good work that ROA is doing, to be a part of the community, and as farmers like us or other farmers, on the demand side, if there's a demand there for it, farmers will supply it. It's either market access or market premium. And there's one person missing on this panel. I see him standing over there, Anthony Carcero, who does Regen Brands. You know, he's almost to his 100th episode right now, and the last question he asked every person that comes on is, you know, how do you get to 50% market share by 2050? And that's all about scaling it, right? Okay, so we'll get to hear from Anthony later, I'm sure. But it's always all the best answers on that. And I've listened to almost all those podcasts, because I used to run when I didn't have a torn Achilles, and, you know, I listen to podcasts. So, but it always comes down to demand, okay? Because if the consumer is going to demand it, the farmers are going to supply it, all the investors are going to invest behind it. It's just, you got to get the consumers to want to either just choose that or pay a premium for it.
Yeah.
Ideally.
We're gonna come back to, like, what are the various facets of demand. And so, Alex, I'm going to plant that seed for you right now, thinking about some of those elements. But Jess, you mentioned something in your comments which I think is important to tease out a little bit, which is the importance of scaling with integrity. So as we get to scale, why do you think it's so important that we actually have rigorous standards that send a clear signal to the marketplace so that the confidence of consumers can be retained and not diluted?
Yeah, we had talked about this kind of in our prep call, but a conversation around what is the tipping point of saturation in the market and how might that impact any kind of premiums. And I think that the real question really comes down to what is the saturation for market confidence within consumers. And right now there is so much confusion. I know Kate mentioned it earlier. A lot of people want to make their purchasing habits with their values in line and their kind of economic opportunities in line, but they aren't sure which way is up. And so what the Alliance and the Institute really have been working towards is, how do we set that highest standard? That doesn't mean that it's all or nothing. There's a journey and a pathway towards this, and it's really a continuum spectrum. But how do we make sure that we set a high standard and not lower those standards in order to scale, but think about what are the mechanisms that we can keep turning and what are the levers that we can keep turning to be able to get to that place. And what we recently did a study with IPG Media Brands that told us some really interesting study analysis on how consumers are understanding certifications and labels, and still between 50 to 75% of folks who were surveyed in that study either don't know of or do not understand most of the labels on their food. And so I think that's a bigger piece that we have to kind of play a market into and be able to do more consumer education and awareness. And it really is about this spectrum of how do we hold a really high standard and make sure that we're able to get more people into that journey and that pathway, rather than trying to lower the bar to get as many people in and then hope that we grow those standards with integrity over time.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more color to that, right? At the end of the day, we're trying to get as many acres transitioned as possible to regenerative organic standards along the things that we just talked about. But we recognize the fact, and I think it's been brought up here in a number of different points, that farmers are not going to instantaneously go to regenerative organic. There's going to be a journey connected to that. We have a number of farmers, for example, that are organic, right? Michael, you've talked to this before. You start organic and say, how do we also pay attention to soil health and start moving in the direction of regenerative organic that way, and then recognize, okay, there are social fairness standards that I need to be paying attention to, and there are animal welfare standards that I need to be paying attention to. Other farmers come to it from a soil health perspective and basically say, we recognize that we want to do work starting from the soil up, but we recognize we also do not want to put any more pollutants into our atmosphere. We want to eliminate, like Kate was talking about earlier, greenhouse gas emissions, and we recognize the importance of actually being able to move towards organic. So in the context of ROA, we actually now have a set of equivalency standards so that a farmer who is interested in transitioning can get, for example, a third-party verified standard in soil health that we recognize, and they can immediately apply that to their ROC certification. So they don't have to do another certification in soil health, or they don't have to do another certification in social fairness, because through one of the third-party verified standards that are out there, we recognize the fact that this is a journey in this path. So we do recognize the fact that we want to build that funnel, we want to make that funnel wide, but we also have to recognize the fact that we have to make it rigorous so that we can send a very clear signal to the marketplace that importantly the retailers can be paying attention to and say, these are the standards that we want to see within our own grocery stores to send a signal to our consumers that if you buy this product, it is going to be aligned with the standards that you have. And we don't get to a situation where we dilute this mission and this effort through greenwashing, which is a real risk at this stage of the game. We can keep talking about that. Alex, you mentioned earlier about ecosystem services, right? Thinking about like how this needs to work holistically. How do we think about public policy? How do we think about how this whole flywheel starts to work in a coherent fashion? As you're thinking about that again from where you're deploying capital, how you're thinking about your own thesis, share a little bit more about some of those elements. Tease that out in terms of like the ecosystem support services and the relationships between supply and demand.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, we've sort of had to, in the earlier days, do it on our own. We haven't been able to rely a lot on ecosystem, except with our, close partners like ROA and others. But everyone's kind of got a job to do, and they've got to put their heads down and do it. I think one of the biggest things that could change the trajectory of all of this work is government subsidies. But for me to spend my time there would not be productive. I see our job as identifying models that work and proving their viability so that we can catalyze more of those models, the replication of those models, and also more capital into the space to then scale them. I don't think we've been successful on the latter yet. There's a lot of talk about regenerative ag and principles and investment, but in terms of like the true impact that's growing this on the ground, we've still got so much work to do. And part of it is communication challenge in terms of education that you were talking about, awareness, consumer confusion. We are guilty of that as well. I think with a lot of the businesses that we build and that we support, the entrepreneurs who are building them, there's so many things you want to talk about because you're doing so many things right. And we had a brand agency that we were working with last year that calling them ego boosters. And they're like, they feel really good, but only you care. And so to create the demand, you have to have a really amazing product. And I think that's something that can sometimes get lost, and we want to talk about how the nutritional density is higher, and it's, bringing back biodiversity of the farms and our soil organic matter. And it's like, oh my God, who's going to think about that, when they're making a purchase decision? And so we have to be really realistic about where the consumer is, not just where the farmers are, and meet them there with a great product and a business model that works. And I think that's where on the investment side, I'll spend a second there because I think it's really critical. We need more capital in the space. We cannot do this on our own. And we have to, as investors, think about like, what are realistic expectations, return horizons, exit valuations, all of these things. What is the timeline? What are timeline of impact, and what is the timeline of the financial return? And are those aligned? And most times they're not. And do we need an 80% gross margin? That's crazy if we're talking about, animals and, on the land. You can't. Sometimes you can charge $28 for a chicken, but not all the time. And even then, your margin's not going to be 80%. And so thinking about really what are the attributes that people are willing to pay for, and then hopefully, in terms of ecosystem support, those people will then fill in, whether it's government, regulation, subsidies, education, marketing, all of those things do need to come in after that.
Yeah. You brought up a really good point around this idea that we can't do this in isolated ways. We have to do this in holistic ways. One of the things that we're really paying close attention to within the context of demand at ROA is how do we work with our 250 plus brands together holistically to help build a campaign around consumers to be able to get to precisely, Jess, what you were talking about earlier about consumer awareness, retail collaboration and support, so that not every brand has to do this on their own, but actually join as part of a broader effort to be able to lift up and tell important stories that then increases consumer awareness, recognize that they can build demand around that, gets the retail to nudge and move in that direction. And so we're doing, for example, this really interesting campaign with Sprouts, it's a natural foods that you probably know about, with an end cap in November around some beauty products. And so it's going to be a collection of beauty products that are all made with regenerative organic ingredients. And so it's a way to be able to tell a broader story so that not every brand has to do this on their own, but they can work together around the umbrella of what does ROC look like. So I think there's ways that we can actually move away from this siloed, fragmented approach to saying, how do we do things more holistically to drive broader consumer awareness and be able to do that. And I think one other quick thing, and I was so appreciative that Kate was able to spend her time on this, is really how do we think about wholesale market channels, specifically around farm to school and food as medicine, because as we get to the question of like, why is it more important that we actually start to feed our children, for example, chemical-free food that's more nutrient-dense? Why would we not want to do that for our kids? And it's nice to see that that the school systems like New York City are making moves in that direction. Michael, from a farming perspective, let's talk about transition. And I know you've got your own story around forest farmers, but I know that you also spend a lot of time talking to other farmers about how they think about the transition. Greg talked about this earlier in terms of his comments on once you get past the cost of transition, that 3 to 5 years, how you start to see some real return on investment. If you could reflect a little bit on that idea of that transition, how do we address cost issues? How do we address knowledge issues? What's the role that the market continues to play to be able to incentivize farmers to be able to make that move? That'd be great.
Sure, yeah. I used to work for Cornell for 13 years doing outreach to farmers, and so I got to know a lot of them and understand their struggles as well. With us, there was no cost of transition because we were already essentially regenerative organic, so I'm not a good example. But speaking to other agricultural producers and commodities, to try to switch either from conventional to regenerative organic or from organic to regenerative organic, there's probably going to be some costs. And so you either need to be able to absorb them long-term, knowing you're making an investment to eventually reduce your costs, or get a price premium to cover the additional costs. And I know it takes time, and so you're not going to be able to immediately recoup those depending on the time it takes for the whole transition to get ROC certified, if that's what your goal is. But there are going to be major differences. Like we were talking to prepare for this, somebody really wants to have ROC chicken products. You can't get them, okay? Because it's so costly to be able to transition to that. They were able to transition the beef to ROC. That was easier. And so just knowing what, I think for the ROA to understand, you know, if we want to get 3 more million acres, what are the products that are going to be the easiest to be able to transition? And that'll help build even more momentum, which will probably drive down the barriers for the ones that are more difficult. You know, basically, you know, the low-hanging fruit first.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you mind if I add to that? I want to just acknowledge that the conversation that we've been having around scale has been talking a lot about kind of consumers and the marketplace. I think it would be remiss to not kind of acknowledge that we all are sitting on the shoulders of farmers who have been doing this work and have invested in these transitions long before there was a market to be able to sell them to. And so I think when we talk about capital, when we talk about where there needs to be additional investment, we have to remember the farmers in this work. And farmers and producers are going to produce where there is a market to sell and where the risk is low. Greg talked so much about de-risking this process. And I think being able to understand that there are really great organizations out there who are helping and working hand in hand with farmers to help de-risk all along this process is really important. And we need to find additional ways to bolster those organizations and help those services for farmers so that during their 3 to 5 year transition, where they aren't able to get that price premium, they're able to introduce really great regenerative organic practices that produce a higher yield so that they're still able to sell and make money through that transition and through that process. What does it look like for more rural communities to be able to increase that market access? And so it's really consistently looking at that 360 ecosystem around this and making sure that at the end of the day, we are supporting farmers. We all ate lunch, we all have clothes on our body, it's all thanks to farmers. And if we forget that investment in those folks, then really the scale of all of this is for naught.
Yeah. One of the things that we're paying close attention to, right, is how do we, and Greg, you brought this up too, around this idea of commitment, pre-commitments, because I think one of the things that farmers will respond well to is how do we figure out a way that we can reduce the cost of that transition to, Michael, your point, there is a cost. There was, as you guys know, climate smart commodity grants with the Inflation Reduction Act. Those are going away. So how do we start figuring out other sources of capital that might be able to do that? We've talked about the idea, for example, of a regenerative organic farmers fund to be able to help subsidize the cost of that transition for all of the reasons that we need to do that. That's largely going to have to take place either through public policy or through philanthropic capital. You can see some of that happening globally. We still need to return back to that question domestically. But the other thing that will, I think, help to spur more farmers to be able to make that transition is not only access to terrific consultants. Rodale, for example, has got 23 consultants that are out in the field working closely, like you did, Michael, with farmers to be able to make that transition, but then be able to connect with products or with brands that are willing to say, we want a chicken product. We are having these precise conversations. We want a regenerative organic chicken product. We're going to be willing to make forward contracts or pre-commitments to be able to buy that chicken from that farmer, which will then be able to further spur and spark that farmer saying, okay, got it. I've got confidence now that I can actually make these investments, make this transition, and on the backside of that, being able to work it through. Alex, this is a curveball question because we didn't really prep for it, but I want to curious how you think about this. One of the things that I have not heard today is the fact that we're also going against the tide of recognizing that we in all of this conversation, the reason that conventional agriculture is still the prevailing model is because the true cost of that food is not represented. And so is there a way for us to be able to recognize, the cost of conventional agriculture to our environment, to our economies, and to our health, and be able to then change the narrative to say that is a extractive, destructive source of our food, and if we shift to regenerative organic practices, here are the contributive natures of that, and we can actually pull the data to be able to demonstrate that from, again, an environmental, economic, and health perspective. How do you think we can get there in this process?
It's a rabbit hole I went down a couple years ago when I learned about it, because I was like, this is the solution. Like, if we have true cost accounting, if we were to, and can we do it with our farm? Can we internalize all the what's externalized, and have that as a model? Dan Barber talks a lot about that. David Lazaks also has a really great paper on this. I was overwhelmed by how to do that and said, okay, I'm going to have to put this aside and come back to it one day because I just don't see it happening right now. And the other challenge is that a lot of this requires kind of capital for like research. I think the most promising way that we can get to this in a true way, rather than internalizing, the health costs and, what is, I mean, health is the biggest one, right? I think the environment is another one. The cost of extracting from our soils and depleting them of their minerals and all of that is very real. That has to be in the nonprofit world side of things, because the ROI for a for-profit investor or even a business to do that today it's not clear enough for us to like be able to shift our attention there. I think certification is already sometimes a lift, even like B-Lab, with their new standards. Now it's going to take probably one full-time employee at least to do that sort of thing. So you layer on top of true cost accounting, like that's just too many steps away. But I think nutritional density is going to be the shortcut to that. I think, and the work that Audacious and Bionutrient Food Association are doing is incredible, and I'm so excited about it because that is something that people will pay for. I think, in speaking to some of the founders of kind of the organic movement on the brand side of things, like it was health that really pushed that over the obstacle to be USDA recognized. And so I think health is going to be the thing again here with regenerative organic that will be really just eye-opening to the consumer, and that will account for all the costs and externalities that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be able to bring that on the table. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of Audacious, for example, they now are going and testing regenerative organic versus conventional in terms of nutrient density. They're also looking at toxicity. So these are now going to be some really good data-driven stories that we're able to surface and say, look at the difference between this in terms of just food as medicine, for example. The nutrient density and getting some dosage questions is going to be starting to become really interesting. And how do you get to data-driven storytelling that can then further drive demand? So, Michael, I would love to get your perspective on this in terms of how you think about this idea of storytelling to be able to increase demand for your own product. Where do you see there being maybe some of that unlock that Alex was talking about? And where do you see the opportunities before you, and where would you love to get some additional support in that storytelling to help drive further demand for your product?
Oh, sure. Well, today's Earth Day, right? And everybody here is, here for different reasons, but I think we all care much more about the environmental aspects of regenerative agriculture than the average person. Okay, I would love it if the story we could tell is, from my perspective. I mean, I'm just commercial for a second, but we're making the best sweetener in the world from an environmental perspective, because we're saving forests that would otherwise get cut down by just collecting sap out of them every year. We maintain those forests; they do all the benefits of the forest. And then we get this incredible sweetener as a result. Compared to every other sweetener requires conversion of some type of natural habitat to plant cane or beet or corn or coconut or whatever. So that's the environmental story that I wish resonated much more than it does. People buy maple syrup because they love the taste of it. That's the number one thing. They're worried that we're going to hurt the trees. Okay? They think we're hurting the trees by drilling a little hole in them. We're not, right? We're saving these trees because they would otherwise get cut down, because maple lumber is very valuable. So when we bought 10,000 acres of land, over 2,000 of it was already basically clear cut, and the rest of it was going to get harvested, but we bought it from the timber company, and now we're saving it to collect the sap every year. So when you look at all the data about why people make food purchasing decisions, the environmental factor is usually pretty low. Hopefully that's rising, but that's not the story that's going to get the people to buy it. It's another additional thing that they can make them feel good about it, but they're going to buy based on taste, nutrition, cost, maybe a couple other things. Those are the top things, right? Packaging, does it look good, all that stuff. But I do think that even though it's low, I think because regenerative agriculture has, yes, it's going to have more nutrient-dense food. We're going to know that. There's going to be great data showing that. I think that's obvious. But we got to be able to tell the story in a way that doesn't shame people and then more excites people. I forget who I was talking to last week, but she was here at the conference. Raise your hand if I know there's somebody who's doing like stories.
I was having a random conversation with you last week.
No.
Raise your hand.
It was not random. And in fact, it was Elizabeth Whitlow connected me with her. I forget her name, but there? Here we go. Yeah. And I had a horrible connection. Yeah. But the stuff that you're doing to tell the story of regenerative agriculture in a way that is entertaining and informative, and it's going to get people to it. That's, I think, like from what I've learned about what you're doing, I mean, it's great stuff. And so the more we can do of that, I think, everybody's an influencer these days, right? But to actually have an influence, it's going to take some really good communication with the right messaging.
At the Institute, so we've been around for now almost 78 years, and one of the things that we are really thinking about and need to do a better job of is helping to translate the science. We have incredible science that is happening all across the US and in Europe, and we sometimes get stuck in our silos of understanding that within our ecosystems, we get it, we understand, and we're not necessarily translating that in ways that are really tangible for outside audiences. So that's one way that the Institute is really thinking about this, is we've gotten a great handle on how we're translating the science to farmers, but how are we actually translating it to the everyday consumer is something that we definitely want to continue to work on and work with partners to be able to do.
We're in the final couple minutes of this conversation, but we're going to be around, so if anybody wants to come talk to us, we'd love to talk to you. Why don't we just do a quick round robin here in terms of, if you were to think about one thing that really needs to happen in terms of actionable steps. We obviously have, as you suggested, Michael, a group of people who are deeply committed to this work, coming at it from different vantage points. Where do we need to be, where do we want to encourage people to be able to take their actions to be able to help accelerate this transition? I'll start with you, Michael, come to you, Alex, and round out with you, Jessica.
Everybody's coming from a different perspective. There's a huge, wide range of people here, and I would say do what you can from where you're coming from. If you're on the consumer side, we vote with our dollars every day, so we can choose what to purchase, what to eat. If you're funding, you can decide what to fund. If you're doing educational work, you can help the farmers. So it's all where you're. And as a farmer, you can just decide to just do regenerative practices. Even if you're not yet certified, even if you don't have the market, you can just go for it because you know that's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Alex.
I think think about the impact that you're trying to have and start there and be really kind of humble about putting your ideas aside of what you think that should look like, and really starting with, okay, what is the impact I'm trying to have, and then what is possible from there, rather than starting with a framework of, okay, this is what I need, how do I get there? I think that's critical, and it's true of practices on the land, it's true of investment, it's true of every kind of little action we do throughout the day.
And I'll just kind of reemphasize and maybe summarize some of this. I think every single person in this room has a sphere of influence that they can pull the lever on. And to know and understand and harness that power is critically important in this moment. So as Michael said, if you have access to capital, think really hard about where you're putting that. Look at organizations who are thinking about this flywheel, who are actively working within this flywheel, so that we can really scale this movement forward in the right ways and with integrity. If you are a farmer or landowner, take that next step. How are you adapting or adopting one new practice? If you need help, call the Institute. We're happy to help you through that process. If you are an everyday consumer, as Michael said, vote with your dollars, but also make sure that you are thinking about voting in policies that are really amplifying and protecting this movement. There's a lot of work to be done, but when we're doing it together, it really does make light work with a lot of hands. And so I think not being overwhelmed with all that has to happen, but thinking about, as Alex said, like, what can we do next, and just keep moving that momentum forward.
Within the context of the ROA, it is the Regenerative Organic Alliance. The alliance is purposeful. We are a movement. We are part of a group of partners like Rodale and the other partners that are part of our community. And so we invite all of you to come join us in this movement building. We're working hard with our 250 brands, for example, to lift up and tell those stories. We're hiring a brand new brand engagement manager, for example, to lean into that work. Working closely with our farming community to be able to help them make that transition, and be able to work closely with our partners like Rodale on being able to reduce the cost, being able to get access to that knowledge, and be able to get access to that market. And then a lot of what we've been talking about, that data-driven storytelling. How do we capture the data analytics? How do we translate that into good storytelling to be able to drive further demand? This is the way that we're going to help to accelerate that. So we collectively thank you for having us here. I want to thank our panelists for such insightful comments, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Hey guys, another round of applause. That was amazing.
If you all are wondering, the barter market is going to close in about 15 minutes. So if you have items on the table or you still want to barter, you got 15 more minutes to do it.
Thanks. Yep. So you heard, Lee, about the barter session. So now, as many of you can tell, we're going to be moving into a break. I encourage you, walk around, chat with different people, and we'll be back.
Testing. Everyone, we're going to get this next session kicked off in just a minute here, so please make your way to your seats. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. We're just getting. Oh no, I'm so sorry.
It's just beans.
Okay, thank God.
I love that.
Hey guys, we're just gonna get our next session kicked off in just a second here.
Totally.
Awesome.
Sons were not. Didn't miss that.
Hey, so sorry to interrupt. For
Sorry.
Oh, did you trade for this?
I did. I traded for it.
Well, that is amazing. What'd you trade?
An egg.
Very nice. And you still got one egg to go.
Yeah, I got a couple more.
Okay. When you're ready, I'll just do a quick intro and leave you to it.
Okay, let me grab my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go.
Testing. All right, everyone, we're going to get this next session kicked off. If everyone could please make their way to their seats, thank you. Yeah. All right, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Ethan Solovey from How Good. For those of you who don't know, Ethan was kind enough to host us at Regen House this past NYC Climate Week, where we had just a fantastic event thanks to his team. So we're grateful to have him join us, and he's going to be sharing some stories about his work and his experiences at Regen House. So Ethan, take it away.
Hey, everybody, come sit down. Yee-hoo! Come on, take a seat. Let's get a round of applause for Cortland. And another one for Jackson. He's hustling people outside. Hi. Who had a sip of water, like drank some New York City tap water today? Okay, where did that water come from? Catskills. Where in the Catskills exactly? The reservoirs, big reservoirs. Which ones? The Ashokan Reservoir. How many people have been to the Ashokan Reservoir? Oh, a couple of them. Okay, cool. Do you know how the water gets down here? A gigantic pipe, like that humans could fit inside of, the aqueduct. It runs right under my house, 400 feet down where I live up in the Hudson Valley, all the way down to here. What does Ashokan mean? This is the water you all drink. This is the best water in the world, right? Everybody says, New York City, best drinking water in the city in the world. But you don't know what the name means. It means the place of fish, place where there were a lot of fish. How many towns did they put underwater to build the reservoir that you drink out of? 5. 5 whole towns got displaced. So that's just the water. So if you were to get from my house where I live, the farm that I live on, 30-acre apple orchard, grass-fed sheep and lamb, shiitake mushroom outfit, if you wanted to get to right here, you could drive in your car or you could do it in a canoe. Actually, Sean, who's sitting here, knows a bit about taking a canoe. So I haven't done the whole trip from my house to here. It would take a couple weeks, but I did a portion of it on the 2-row wampum rowing treaty that happened in 2013 with hundreds of people rowing in line down the Hudson River, what we now call the Hudson River. Didn't used to be called the Hudson River. What did it used to be called? Not the Ashokan River. Got a jokester here. What did the river used to be called? Wow. He got something. He said something about 2 directions. So the indigenous name for the river pre-colonization was the river that flowed both ways. Different ways to say it, but usually you would say Mahikanatak or Mahikanitak. And that means the river that flows both ways. Why do they call it that? It's tidal. It literally turns back and forth. If you're ever on the water, it's crazy. The water goes upstream, and then it turns and goes downstream. So I could canoe here from my house, out the Rondout Creek, hook by Kingston, come down. Would I come down around the tip of Manhattan to get here? No, you hook a left at Inwood, right? And you come down the East River to get here, and I would have made it to pretty much, what's that bay that's right here called? Who lives in Brooklyn? Now you don't want to raise your hand. What's the name of the bay that's right here where the Navy Yard is? You guys know? No, they don't know. No. So it's the Wallabout. Do you just look it up? No more cheating. No more cheating. Okay, so that's the Wallabout Bay. Why is it called Wallabout? The Wallabout came from the Walloons, who were some of the first colonists who settled here, doing horrible things and growing some food and some other crops. So what were the crops that were grown like right here where we're sitting, 1600s? A bunch of stuff, but one of the things that's well known right here that I thought was really interesting was tobacco. There are huge tobacco fields like right here. The Walloons from Wallonia. Where's Wallonia? Belgium, cool. So like the whole southern French part of Belgium, Wallonia, the Walloons, they settled here, Wallabout Bay. This was the spot from which all of Brooklyn was colonized at the time of colonization here. And we're right across the way from that other place on there's a little kind of corner of Manhattan over there. What's that called? I can just do this all day. This is great. This is my whole talk. It's called Corlear's Hook. Corlear's Hook, very terrible things happened there under William Kieft. There was a massacre of the Canarsie peoples who were there. Just terrible, terrible things happened there. And that's right here, that's right under our feet. And so I think it's important if we're going to talk about regenerative agriculture that we think a little bit about regenerative culture because it's right there in the Word. And for many, many thousands and thousands and thousands of years, peoples from around the world, all of our indigenous ancestors, no matter where they were from, connected culture and agriculture. Actually, there's a whole long time before we had agriculture. But that growing of food, that production, was fully woven and integrated into the place. And the history of that and knowing the origins of each place so that you can tell the story, so you know where your water comes from, so you know the soil you're standing on. Agriculture and regenerative agriculture is not just about principles or practices to fix the soil. It's much bigger. It can be much bigger and deeper than that. So my hypothesis is if we want to regenerate agriculture, we need to do a little more work thinking about regenerating culture. And so what I want to offer today in the next, I don't know how long, 15 minutes, is 4 principles, for kind of thoughts about how you might start regenerating culture alongside the amazing regenerative agriculture work that everyone here is doing. And I'm going to try to do that by telling a story. I have 0 slides, and I noticed that for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, people they didn't have PowerPoints. And they told stories, and actually people's memories were much better. Their vocabulary was much better than we have now. So it's an edge for me. I usually have like a really nice deck and like a whole demo of the software that my company sells. But today I'm just going to try to tell a story. I'm not an expert at this. I'm not an expert in regenerative agriculture or regenerative culture. There are people here in the room who are more in touch with their intact land-based indigenous ancestries, much more so than I am. And if anything, you can look to them and respectfully ask them for some of their own stories that might go in this direction. But ultimately, the story I'm going to tell is not the most important story here. I'm going to say it's each of your stories. So as I go through this little walk I'm going to do, I'm going to invite you to think about the principles that I offer, but then apply it to yourself. So that means you got to think about like the place you live, or a farm that you farm on, or a place that you care a lot about, and don't try to copy what I'm doing, because what I'm doing is unique to the origins of my place. I want you to think about, how does this apply where I am, and what am I going to do with it? So my name's Ethan Soloviev. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood. Very happy and proud to sponsor here. HowGood is a sustainability data company, largest database in the world. We work with major food companies and tiny, really cool food companies like some of the ones that are here to help them understand the impact of their food products and how they can use AI and the thinking of regeneration to improve their products. That's the last thing I'm going to say about HowGood. If you want to know more about it, glad to jam. So here's this little story and some of the principles I want to put forward. So the first one I already sort of did, and that is, if you want to regenerate culture and agriculture, you must know the origins of the place that you are, of the water that you're drinking, of the seeds that you're planting. You got to know their origins and their story, and you got to dig back and look towards them and see what emerges from that. We got a chance to do this at a kind of funny global event. It's they call it Davos. It's at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, and I went there, and everybody, big corporate CEOs and heads of state, and everybody's talking about regenerative agriculture, like it's this great, hot, big new thing. But then the food they were eating was terrible. It was awful. It was like sugary and molecular, and everybody would like hand you a glass of champagne, but there was nothing in it. There was no soul. There definitely weren't any farmers anywhere. The second year I was there was the first indigenous delegation to the World Economic Forum ever. And so it's just like, it's very high level. It's making decisions that affect the whole world, but they were eating food, off the Cisco truck or whatever. I actually can't say that. Cisco's a great partner and friend of ours. But actually, if you ever want to see the Chief Sustainability Officer of Cisco, big, largest food distributor in the world, if you ever want to see him do a DJ set for a dance party, then you can come to Regen House at Climate Week. He committed to spin again this year. Okay, so I was at Davos, and I was like, all right, we got to get the food better. Let's see if we can make a house where the food is actually regenerative. If these people are going to do regeneration, then we should feed them regenerative food. So the next year we came back, we brought regenerative farmers from Spain and Switzerland. They brought their beautiful jamon iberico and their cheeses. There's rare mountain cheeses in Switzerland that you can't get anywhere else. They also have surprisingly good wine in Switzerland. What are some of the grapes from Switzerland? Where's Ivo? Does he know? There's Pinot, they do that. They have one called Cheslas, which makes a very nice white. They have an old one called a Reze, where they make what's that called? Solera, where they kind of they make sherry. Beautiful, beautiful things. You never get Swiss wine outside of Switzerland. Why not? They drink it all. It's really good wine, and they don't let it out. And so when you're there, you get these flavors that are unique to Switzerland. So we featured these wines. We featured these grapes that you can only get there. We had the mountain cheese that you can only get in this one part of Switzerland. That was expressing something unique about the place. We put the regenerative farmers, we had them up here, but instead of doing a panel, because Regen House doesn't do panels, we had the farmers up, and we flipped the script and we let the farmers ask the Davos people questions. Why the fuck aren't you funding regenerative agriculture? What are you doing with all your money, actually? So we flipped the script. And we highlighted the voices and the unique flavors of that individual place. And this is the second principle I want to put forward, that if we're grounding ourselves in the origins of a place, then we have a chance to set a goal, which is how do you express the unique flavor of each place? I had an amazing example of this since I've been a kid on a very small scale. My dad tapped sugar maple trees and we would make maple syrup. A bunch of years later, I learned to make like a maple sugar out of the maple syrup. But just today, thanks to Angela, I got to taste this incredible thing that I've never had before in my whole life, which is a maple sugar that's been smoked. And this is a flavor that's from where Angela is, and the trees from that place, and a smoking technique from just there, and I've never had anything like it. That's expressing the uniqueness of a place, right? That's what we should be trading, is the terroir, not just of wine, but of spirits, like we'll hear about next, of carrots, of sugar. When you have something unique coming out of a place, then we have this incredible biocultural culinary diversity that's just wonderful and fun to eat on. And it's effective at helping people taste their place and choose to change their minds. So we did this at Davos, and then we took it further. Everyone had a good time, so we came to Climate Week in New York City, and we ended up renting 6 floors of a building, including a rooftop with a bar. And at Climate Week last year, we put on, it was about 40 events over the course of 4 days that showcased a huge diversity, both the food and the companies and the organizations that are doing incredible work out there in the world. And so this is this idea of Regen House. This is a traveling venue that goes from place to place, from Davos to Climate Week to COP in Brazil or Dubai or Cali, Colombia, and brings forth the origins, the stories, the flavors of the place, and puts people together around a table. Not at a conference. I mean, I like conferences, this is great, but people change even more when they get to sit around a table and have wine and spirits and fruits that are unique to the place. This can accelerate change. So after Climate Week last year, it was incredibly successful. We decided to expand. We 10x the number of Regen House events around the world. So this year we were at Expo West. We did a regenerative dinner at Disneyland, which was like just what a juxtaposition. Usually you just go in and get your hot dogs, but they actually have incredible chefs, and they cooked a meal with ingredients from Simple Mills, and from Good Sam and from other regenerative producers. 75 executives sitting at a dinner table thinking hard about how do I take this further? How do I make this change happen significantly in my company? And so this is the third principle for regenerating culture. If we know the origins, if we're tasting the uniqueness of each place, then what we want to look for is these acupuncture points. Not leverage points. Leverage points is like if you're a machine. If you're in the Navy Yard, you got a lot of levers. Yeah? Living systems, farms, landscapes are not machines. So if you ever hear anybody talking about a leverage point to move something in a system, they're thinking like a machine. So instead we want to look for acupuncture points, little spots where we can do a tiny bit of work and shift the energetic flows of the whole system. So Regen House showed up to taste the flavors of place, to bring forward the farmers and the indigenous community members in each place at COP, at Davos, at Climate Week, at South by Southwest, the places where people go who are making the decisions that move the world. So that's our hunch, that's our thought about here maybe is an acupuncture point. All I have to do is basically show up and throw a party. And that might move the world if we have all of the regenerative principles in place happening there. But this alone isn't enough. One-off events, don't do it, right? You go to a conference, it's fun, you meet good people, you have some good conversations. Maybe there's a one-on-one business deal you end up doing out of that. Maybe you get a job. But one-off events are not enough to actually make systemic change. And so everything that I've been part of that's helped me grow as a person has had some aspect of a community, and a community that persisted over time. And so part of what's coming this year, Regen House will pop up all over the world. You should come to the events, they're amazing. But also there will be a new layer, because the Regen House is sort of like it's like a house. So you come in the first time in the front door, you have a drink, you meet someone, you leave. You go the next time, you sit down, you have a meal, it's really lovely, but then you leave. But then when you come back, what you want to go to is the heart of the house, everybody's heart of everybody's house, around the fire, in the kitchen. And in the kitchen, my friend Karen Rodriguez, an indigenous Mayan woman who started Kiss the Ground, she's there helping me cook a pot of soup. And we got a farmer coming in. Mike comes in with his birch syrup, which I also got. Amazing. I traded it for an egg. I don't even know if he took the egg. Yeah. This is an amazing egg. I have, there's little pins. Regen House has swag. So if you, and he already knows the answer, so he can't get one. But if anybody else can name 2 of the 3 species of leaves that are on that egg, then it'll give you a hint, or like a sense of the unique, that could only have been made at the place I made it with my kids last week. That's it. So if you can name them, I'll give you a pin. We got a little Regen House pin. It's hard-boiled, yeah. Nobody eat it. I want to eat it. So we need a longer-term commitment and a longer-term community to make change. And so part of what's coming with Regen House this year is an invitation to come into the kitchen where the farmers and our local indigenous community members and the CEO who's actually taken enough time to slow down and learn to cook a little so he's or she is welcome in the kitchen. That's where they're hanging out. And so this is a realm that is like a Regen House member, where the companies that we're part of and the organizations that we're part of are not, they're not there. You're just there as an individual, and you are there to ask the deeper questions of how do we accelerate systemic change? How do we find the acupuncture points? What happens when we know the origins of our place and when we express them through the food that we're making and tasting? That's pretty much what I got to say today, but what I want to invite you to do is make it real for yourselves. So I want to invite you, in the transition we're going to do, I'm going to have you turn to a neighbor, and I want you to think about your place or your work and see what happens if you apply those principles, what sprouts. And if you want to come to Regen House and come be a member later this year, just holler. Let me know. I'm super easy to get. Ethan@howgood.com. Thank you, and turn to a neighbor. Go for it. Great.
All right, now.
Give him a minute.
All right.
They need like 30 seconds at least. Give him a minute.
Testing. All right, everybody, before you start breaking off, we have another session coming here. As many of you know, there were some pretty devastating wildfires in Los Angeles this year. What you may not have been thinking about is how it's impacting farmers and farmland. And so it's my pleasure to next introduce Carla Avila from the California Alliance for Family Farmers, who's going to speak about both the effects of those wildfires and the opportunities for rehabilitation through regeneration. Carla, welcome to the stage. And would you prefer a handheld mic or to speak at the podium?
If I have slides, so maybe podium.
Yeah.
That was a really awesome last question, so I totally understand why everybody's excited to talk to their neighbor about that. Thanks, Ethan, for all of that inspiration. My name is Carla Avila, and I am a regenerative, diversified family farmer and rancher in Northern California, in very remote, rural Northern California. And my family has been stewarding land for thousands of years in Northern California, but I'm actually the first generation in my family to own a farm. So it's been a long time coming. Thank you. And today I'm also the Director of Philanthropy for Community Alliance with Family Farmers, which is an organization that I am absolutely proud and honored to be a part of. We started out 46 years ago as a very grassroots-led movement by small and organic and regenerative farmers in California. It was at the advent of the tomato harvester being invented at UC Davis and being put out on the market. And within a year and a half, about 80% of California's small and organic family farms were going out of business. So it was a very, very pivotal moment in time for where the future trajectory of regenerative, organic, and small and mid-scale farming would go, where the future of California farmers would head. And so a lot of these farmers formed an organization which for the last 46 years, Community Alliance with Family Farmers, has now been the voice of the small and regenerative farming movement in California, in Sacramento, and in DC. So we also do a lot of on-the-ground programs to help farmers, in particular with transitioning to ecological farming practices. And we don't require you to be certified to be part of the work we do. Really, it's about the bridge between farmers and their local communities and building local resilient food systems. So working from the ground up and working from the top down to connect supply chains. We work a lot on farm to school. We work with hundreds of food banks across the state, and we have currently thousands of farmers who are working in all kinds of different programs through CAF, from ecological farming to direct to consumer and a lot of policy advocacy. Without CAF, we wouldn't have the laws that came into place to allow direct-to-consumer retail for small farmers in California, including farmers markets and CSAs, or community-supported agriculture. But even though my farm is very diversified and we've had a lot of success with regenerative practices, I'm preaching to the choir here, we've had a lot of wonderful talk today about just all of the wonderful evidence about when you're building soil, sequestering carbon, working in closed loop systems. Currently, our farm doesn't have to input any fertility because our vision is to put back more than we take. And that has created a lot of resilience for our farm and economic viability. But the thing that it hasn't done is completely, entirely closed loop on wildfire. It's done a tremendous amount, but the part about it that's challenging is that it takes community-wide scale work. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about what happened in LA recently with those wildfires and some comparative analysis of a lot of the wildfires in California recently. And we're going to kind of go through how regenerative practices being worked on a community-wide scale are making a huge difference in how we rebuild for much more reduced risk and for a lot more resilience, because these fires are not going away. So let's see if my slides work. So just this year, in the last 4 months, there have been 653 wildfires in California that have burned nearly 60,000 acres. In the last decade, California has experienced thousands upon thousands of wildfires. I've personally lived through 5 firsthand in the last 10 years, including one that burned over 200,000 acres and one that burned through our property, but was stopped at our land in large part thanks to our regenerative land management strategies. But every single time fires come through, we had to work as community alongside fire personnel to make it through. It takes an incredible amount of logistic coordination, as you can imagine, to safely evacuate livestock, farm animals, equipment, stored feed, set up and run evac centers, and in our rural neck of the woods, also be the volunteer fire department at the same time. So if you're lucky enough to be able to stay on the land during a fire, you're typically operating without power, and if you lose your water or have to evacuate, obviously you risk losing your crops. If they do survive the fire itself, there's also wind and smoke. But just surviving a wildfire becomes an all-hands-on-deck situation. And throughout California and the West, it happens regularly, and this is not going to change. In fact, it will only become the norm for more and more regions over the next few years. So thus, the work of regenerative wildfire adaptive land management is a year-round effort, and the goal is to regenerate with resilience. In a world where wildfire season is now a year-round occurrence, it's critical that farmers adopt practices that protect their land, property, community, and economy, not if, but when the time will come. The work being done by regenerative farmers in California to not only recover from wildfire, but manage the land with fire and create a healthy relationship between the land, ecology, communities of people, and fire is beyond inspiring. It demonstrates the capacity of agricultural lands to be the solution to climate change, and that farmers are the protectors of our urban and densely populated areas via their management of the farmland that primarily exists in the wildland-urban interface zone. If you've ever heard of the WUI, if you ever hear conservationists talking about the WUI, like WUI, it's actually the wildland-urban interface, and it's the buffer between cities and wilderness, and that buffer is farmland. And the more resilient that farmland is to wildfire, the more protected urban areas will be. The recent Palisades and Eaton wildfires in LA are a case in point for agricultural lands being located in the WUI, in the wildland-urban interface, and what that could mean for the potential recovery of this area, where the choices being made now on how to approach post-wildfire land management practices will impact the future safety or vulnerability of not only the farmland, but of the entire LA area. So in a case study conducted by the LA County Economic Development Corporation, it's estimated that the agricultural sector in LA County will have lost an estimated $8 million due to these two wildfire incidents. The true cost, however, of the losses to agriculture are difficult to quantify because many of those losses are off the farm, although they're critical to the success of the farmer. These numbers do not yet quantify the additional losses up the supply chain, food processing, distribution facilities, farmers markets, and other sectors, goods and services that farmers rely upon. These wildfires in LA have resulted in what's estimated between $28 and $54 billion in property damage. And what is unknown is how much of that total property lost, how many entire neighborhoods that were flattened, could have been saved had more land stewards along the wildland-urban interface zone already implemented wildfire adaptive land management practice ahead of the fire. On top of the economic losses, farmers are responsible for their costs of rebuilding. And it's still too soon to tell in LA what that real cost could be, but we can look at lessons learned from previous wildfires in order to determine the most resilient way forward as we rebuild and recover. The LA Economic Development Corporation also conducted a comparative study of 4 significant wildfires that happened recently. The Marshall Fire in 2021, the Tubbs Fire in Sonoma in 2017, the Camp Fire in Paradise in 2018, and the Lahaina Fire in Maui in 2023. The analysis focused on identifying effective recovery strategies and best practices that could be applied to future wildlife recovery efforts. And the biggest takeaway from what we've learned is the increasing importance of climate resilience in infrastructure planning. So if we look at the numbers, in the Marshall Fire, They implemented climate adaptive infrastructure afterwards and achieved a 60% reduction in system vulnerabilities during subsequent extreme weather events. They developed microgrids for critical facilities to maintain power during extreme weather while reducing grid stress. It was implemented at a cost of $12 million and demonstrated full cost recovery within 3 years through reduced outage impacts and improved energy efficiency. After the Camp Fire, the town of Paradise, which lost 100% of its infrastructure, redesigned their water systems to include increased capacity and redundancy to address both firefighting needs and extended drought conditions. And this approach increased initial costs by 15%, but it provided an estimated 300% return on investment through improved resilience and reduced maintenance needs. Then if you look at the Tubbs Fire, which was documented by Sonoma County, during that recovery it was demonstrated that the effectiveness of climate adaptive building standards makes a huge difference. Their implementation of enhanced insulation requirements and cool roof systems reduced energy demand by 40% while improving building survivability during extreme heat. So if you create a synthesis of these best practices and things we've learned from all the major wildfires we've had, you'll see at the top of the list is the need for a climate-smart framework for the urban-wildland interface. Of course, there's a lot of other things too, but that's still at the top of the list. Farmers and land stewards can adopt these lessons to their own lands. The challenge for farmers is that the cost of recovery includes all of the above: environmental assessment, remediation, protocol development, and lengthy economic recovery sometimes, depending on your situation. It's a big task. Knowing what to do differently when we rebuild is the key to our future success. By taking the opportunity to apply regenerative wildfire adaptive land management practices, we can regenerate with resilience. But what does resilience mean for farmers? Farms often serve as buffers between fires and populated areas. Helping small farms become more resilient against wildfires has co-benefits for their community. On-farm wildfire resilience relies on the concept of stacked practices. So we're talking about implementing preparedness methods like structure hardening, but doing it in conjunction with ecological farming, derived from prescribed burning, cultural burning, very important practice in California that was done for thousands of years by indigenous peoples, then was suppressed for about 100 years by the Forest Service, and that is the mess we're in today. Now we're sitting in a matchbox. And so the way to heal it is to go back to actually prescribe burning intentionally at the right times of year, having a healthy fire come through your land, which actually clears the understory and creates a situation that protects the forest from devastating wildfires. There's also a lot of other practices that come into play. Integrated livestock grazing, making biochar, planting cover crops, and supporting native species and pollinator habitats. So by pairing these approaches together, along with building the capacity of community partners to respond to emergency, you'll see a massive reduction in overall damage and recovery needs. Resilience is also founded on multi-way sharing of knowledge and resources to address impacts, test new ideas, address gaps, and prepare for future disasters. So when you look at best management practices for either remediating from fire or mitigating for future wildfire, the first rule of thumb in wildfire recovery is that nature is your best management practice. And especially in California, it's true that fire is natural in the landscape. It's intended to burn. Soil erosion, I'm not talking about bulldozing it, but in a natural form, when nature does it, is a natural and a land-forming process. Many plants actually depend on fire to regenerate, and some plants and grasslands are stimulated and enhanced by fire. Understanding these natural land processes and the critical role of nature in wildlife and wildfire recovery, and approaching land management practices through a regenerative lens is the best, most resilient path forward, both on farm and community-wide. So I'd love to share a few examples of some regenerative post-wildfire BMPs being done on farms that are part of CAF's Wildfire Resilience Program. And I'm going to talk about mycoremediation to remove heavy metals and toxins from the soil, integrative grazing to manage fuels, prescribed burning and making biochar, and lastly, but certainly not least, working in community. Agriculturalists are key community participants in PBAs, for example, which are prescribed burn associations, and VOADs, volunteer organizations allied in disaster. Two of the most important assets that a community can have is to organize these two things. They're partnerships between everybody, agriculturalists, land stewards, NGOs, and wildfire practitioners. And they're solving huge problems, community by community and farm by farm. So our first example we'll meet is Turkey Tail Farm in Butte County, where owner and operator Chudy developed innovative ways to remediate his post-wildfire soil. When the Camp Fire swept through the town of Paradise in 2018, Cheetah and his family were deeply affected. Not only did they have to evacuate with only some of their livestock, but they lost almost all of their infrastructure and housing on site. Cheetah's house and even the water and power infrastructure were completely destroyed, leaving behind a variety of pollutants from melted cars, pump houses, etc. The recovery process was grueling, but Cheetah not only found an innovative way to treat toxic ash on his site using the power of mushrooms, he also created Butte Remediation, which is now a nonprofit that provides the same service to farmers and rural residents in his community. So when he returned from having evacuated back to his land to assess the damage, he obviously could tell the soil was polluted. His observations prompted him to start asking questions about what to do, what are the nature and quantity of the toxins, and whether it was possible to remediate with mycology. The mycoremediation treatments were effective in reducing heavy metals in the soil. And in addition, straw wattles and jute landscape fabric for erosion control were inoculated with fungi. After the Camp Fire, 300,000 feet of straw wattles were deployed to mitigate erosion in the region. Had all of that also been inoculated with bioremediating fungi, the amount of environmental pollution and health hazards could have been significantly reduced. You can see them inoculating straw, and this is a growing practice, and it's being done community by community, so we're just starting to see people really innovate mycoremediation. But next we'll go ahead and talk about Wild Oat Hollow and the tour de force that is Sarah Kaiser. She is really helping fire-affected communities in Sonoma County and beyond. They're empowering each other through collaborative grazing and investments in fire ecology and soil health. Having animals on the land with appropriate timing, duration, and intensity can help sequester carbon, improve water quality, soil health, and simultaneously bring unlikely partners together in recovery. Today, Wild Oat Hollow manages a grazing cooperative coordinated among a growing number of neighboring farms that is creating a scaled-up approach to managing the urban-wildland interface, not one by one, but collectively, and seeing incredible results. Grazing has been used to manage California grasslands for millennia. California grasslands evolved with frequent disturbances from grazing animals and fire, both of which stimulate growth and prevent tree and shrub encroachment. Today, it's cattle that are grazing the land instead of elk, and grasslands experience fire far less often than they used to. The grasslands that have existed in California for thousands of years were sustained and invigorated thanks to indigenous peoples' use of recurring and variable disturbances. Grasslands are a globally valuable resource. A recent discussion paper from a consortium of conservation groups, including the Nature Conservancy, states that grasslands provide crucial ecological habitats and food and income for over 1 billion people and store over 30% of the world's carbon stocks. They also make substantial contributions to freshwater regulation and soil preservation. So clearly sustaining grassland health is essential not only to nature and the environment, but to agricultural production as well. I know cows get a lot of beef. It's a bad joke, but they always get a bad rap, and so I have to sometimes remind people about the importance of their framework and ecology when it's done right. Lastly, I want to talk about First Rain Farm, nestled in the densely forested foothills of Nevada County. They're using prescribed burning for land management, preparation, and restoration goals. They both do broadcast and pile burning, mechanical treatment, biochar making, and targeted grazing practices. And biochar in particular is renowned for its multifaceted benefits. You're going to get long-term carbon sequestration, pollutant binding, nutrient retention, improved water retention, and in poor soils, you will see enhanced crop yields. It's literally like making a magic out of something that could be a devastation. And targeted grazing is a practice used to achieve goals specific to fuels reduction and dealing with invasive plants. So this approach enhances biodiversity by promoting native plant growth, supporting pollinators and other wildlife crucial to ecosystem health. And ecologically, targeted grazing improves soil fertility through natural fertilization and mitigates wildfire risks by creating fire breaks and reducing fuel loads. These practices also enhance water retention in soils, fostering resilient landscapes that withstand drought and erosion, thus lowering long-term management costs. So here's some examples of the work he's doing with biochar. I'd love for you guys to come out to Northern California and see these things in action. Targeted grazing, you can do incredible amounts to actually bring your land back to full health. And lastly, I just want to say the California Family Emergency Relief Fund was founded by CAF because of how many farmers in the recent years have been devastated and impacted in many, many ways across the state. And we needed a source a funding source where farmers could get relief fast and not necessarily have to go through the process of like federal grant or other programs and not have to check every box to apply for something. We needed something that was fast and responsive. This fund has to date supported over 600 farmers with over $5 million in direct financial relief. And I'm very excited to say that next year, in early March of 2026, Y Regenerative will host a special event in Los Angeles where proceeds will go to CAF's Family Farmer Emergency Relief Fund in order to amplify the impact we can make to provide relief to those farmers impacted by the recent wildfires that devastated LA. And though there's much work to be done, we look forward to supporting farmers and communities as they rebuild a regenerative and resilient future. Thank you.
All right, guys. Time for a little seventh inning stretch. Just get up for a second. Oh, I'm serious. You have to stand up. Like, this is the thing. Yeah. We're going to sit back down, but just sit back down in 1 second. Just stretch your arms. Yeah, I know. There we go. Awesome. All right. So as we sit back down, one of my definitely favorite speakers today, Klaus Martins and I met at a conference that Keith Burns led in Phoenix, Arizona, called the Regenerative Nexus. He's one of the nicest people, honestly, that I've met. Always picks up the phone all the time, despite being just super, super busy. Knows more than I think I'm ever going to know about grain, even if I were to study from now until whenever. And yeah, come on, Klaus. A huge round of applause, please.
Wow, I don't know if I can live up to that. We farm close to 2,000 acres It's certified organic. And our farm is on the land of the Seneca people. And the Haudenosaunee, who were there before us, had an interesting system of agriculture. They didn't use tillage. They didn't use fertilizer. They had a mixed group of crops that grew in the fields. And from what Jane Mount Pleasant, who's studied that form of agriculture, tells us, it produced more calories and protein per acre than Western agriculture achieved until the 1960s. Another interesting piece of it I learned from an old Seneca woman who was a friend of mine and a mentor. And she said they called the weeds that modern farmers have in their field the white man's footprints, that they didn't grow in those fields. And therein lies a question, why not? And I think that's one that we don't spend enough time thinking about. Now, I'm going to make you stretch a little bit, and I usually ask farmers this, and they have a point of reference. So what do you think would happen if I abandoned one of my heavily farmed conventional neighbors' fields and just let it go to nature? What would grow there the first year? And you could probably name the weeds. They would be annual weeds, right? Some of these weeds can make 1 million seeds. What would grow the second year? We would have a different group of plants. Even though we just increased the number of seeds that are there on the surface by many orders of magnitude, why do different plants grow the next time? Okay, the group of plants that were growing there changed the soil. And the next year, we have a different condition and a different group of seeds come up. And I'm just throwing out observations that I made that have helped me figure out how a system works, because what we're talking about in farming is farming systems. The Three Sisters system that our Haudenosaunee predecessors used was a very sustainable system. And I would question how sustainable the current conventional system of farming is, but our challenge is to develop a sustainable system that produces food. If we let this experiment go for 5 years, we would start seeing brambles growing in the fields. We would have goldenrod. We would have sumac. And at least where I live, at about 15 years, we would start seeing black walnut. It's a very predictable progression that's taking place. And there's nothing that's happening in our fields that's random, even though when I went to college and I learned how to farm conventionally, we were taught to react to a series of random events with products that killed things. In fact, we were taught to ask one basic question for every agronomic problem that came along. And you all know what that question is. How do I kill it? And I learned in my life, relatively long lifetime, that if you get the right answer to the wrong question, it's of limited value. So what is the right question when we have pests on our farms? And I would contend the right question is, why is this species out of balance with my farming system? Why is this species causing me economic losses? You know, why does this species suddenly appearing in much higher numbers? The answers to those questions are actually a lot more interesting than how do I kill it. What I've learned in watching different pests develop was a real exercise in frustration when I started out, because I didn't really have the tools to work with. But I was offered some of those tools by older farmers who preceded me before we had chemicals to work with, and also by Cornell University, who helped put science behind what we were seeing happening in our fields. When we first started farming organically, there was not a lot of information to go on. And my questions that I took to the Cornell Library, and that is where I started, was what products can we substitute for the fertilizers that I'm using now, because I did farm conventionally for 20 years, and what machines and tools can I substitute for the herbicides that I'm using? Those were useless questions, but they did lead me to an answer that I wasn't looking for. In all of my searches in the Cornell Library, there weren't a lot of books written before 1940. They were all in the stacks and being stored. But in those stacks, I found a paper written by a German scientist in the 1930s. His name was Bernhard Rademacher. And there were two things in the paper that I found that really made me sit up and take notice and ask questions. The first one was, and I have to give you a little background, Dr. Rademacher was the first researcher who did extensive work on herbicides. One of the people who ushered in the chemical revolution. What he wrote was that cultural practices form the basis of all weed control, while the various other means should be regarded as auxiliary only. In fact, the more I read of Rademacher, the more he criticized herbicides, even though they were a miracle cure. But that raised the question of what are cultural practices? What is this basis of all weed control that this guy who was known as the world expert in his day was saying is the basis of it? And I had to spend a fair amount of time getting answers out of his paper. Another thing that I found in that paper was a statement. He said, every crop should be planted after its most suitable predecessor, so that the growth of the weeds is checked by the vigor of the crop alone. That was a radical idea too. You have to remember, I had been taught in the land-grant university system about the miracle of chemicals. And these ideas really were hard for me to absorb. But when you think about it, if the species that we're trying to grow is the best adapted species for the environment that we have in our field, we would expect that it would have a biological advantage over all the other species, which common sense would tell us should be a big advantage in crop production. And that is indeed how it works. I just didn't know that at the time. In regard to controlling pests, I had a series of lessons from the College of Hard Knocks. And my teachers were the pests and some of the old people. And they were good teachers. In fact, Mother Earth stepped in a couple of times to get my attention. She's the best teacher of all. So I'm going to tell you a story about a weed that made me wonder if we could farm organically. It's called velvet leaf. Anyone here ever hear of velvet leaf? Okay, some of you are familiar with it. Velvet leaf can get 15 feet tall. I thought I was a strong man when I was younger, but I could not pull velvet leaf out of the ground because the roots were too powerful. Velvet leaf also can choke out a crop of corn. And I wondered whether velvet leaf would make organic farming impossible in some of my fields. After starting out, making a lot of mistakes, I had one spot that was particularly bad that I ended up just mowing to the ground. 3 years later, when I was planting corn in that field again, I congratulated myself all over for doing a much better job with my cultivator and with my tillage equipment, killing the velvet leaf. I was kind of stupid at this point. I have to admit that Mother Nature wasn't done teaching me yet. The next time in the cycle, and I have to back up, what we called a rotation in those days was corn, soybeans, and wheat, seeded down to clover. I thought that was a very diverse system, but it's not. And it's not even adequate diversity to maintain a healthy system. But by the third time through the cycle, the velvet leaf wasn't all that bad, and I was really congratulating myself for having learned how to kill weeds. And we had a field day. There were some agronomists there. One of the agronomists said, "Come here, you're not going to have a crop here next week if you don't come up with a chemical real quick." And he showed me clouds of whiteflies. And I said, "Well, let's see what the whiteflies are doing." And turned out they were not touching my crop. They were all over the velvet leaf. Then we noticed that the velvet leaf was really short, and it had some lesions on it, and it had some black leaves, and they were falling off. And most of it died by the end of August. And I thought, I've got a bright idea here. There's probably a disease causing this, and if I could take the spores of that disease, I could get rich selling it as a spray. So I contacted one of my friends at Cornell, Tony, and he came out and looked, and he said, "Well, it would be a good idea if you could explain," and he pointed across the road, "why that velvet leaf has the same disease and it's not looking very sick." Well, then we noticed that there was a virus that was attacking, and the whiteflies were actually vectoring that virus. And I apologize for skipping a bunch of steps here, but I'm trying to get you to the cliff notes real quick. So then I got the idea, well, maybe to get rid of this velvet leaf, it has to be infected by that fungus, which we identified as a velvet leaf anthracnose, and the virus, and have the insects attack it. And I was thinking that these plants are sick because they're being attacked by a fungus, a virus, and an insect. I still was totally out to lunch on this. What was happening was the velvet leaf was being attacked by the fungus, the virus, and the insect because it was sick, not the other way around. These pests were moving in and attacking the least fit plant in the system, and we're ignoring the healthy plants. So I could claim credit for being such a good farmer that my corn was healthier, but really I didn't know what I was doing. This was just a case of starting to learn how systems work. But I'll throw out a few other kind of like eye candy ideas where some of these biological systems just work like magic. There was a aphid in the Salinas Valley in California that attacked romaine lettuce. And in organic romaine lettuce, it would make the heart slimy so that it wasn't marketable. It was discovered that if you plant 44 sweet alyssum plants per acre, uniformly spaced through the lettuce field, you won't have that aphid. There was another case that I really took a few lumps on before I learned. And that was I was growing dry beans, one of the three sisters. And the first year, it was like printing my own money. That was such a profitable crop, and everything worked well. And the next time I planted the dry beans, they didn't grow quite as good. And I thought, oh, this new variety isn't very good. And after about 8 or 9 years, it wasn't doing well at all. In fact, it had root rot, it had insects attacking it, and it just wasn't growing. And boy, this new variety is really bad. Well, I contacted a friend at Cornell. His name was George Abawi, and he had been studying this problem. Dry beans, New York at one time was the biggest dry bean producer in the country. Of course, it was one of the three sisters that our Haudenosaunee forefathers and mothers, especially mothers, because their farming system was run by the grandmothers of the clan, had been growing for years. And why was it suddenly not growing for me? George had been way ahead of me on this. He had done an experiment. He had found that there was a complex of diseases that was attacking the roots of the dry beans. And he took a field that was heavily fouled with this disease complex, And it had nematodes, so the nematodes were abrading the roots, the diseases were moving in. And even on conventional farms, the fungicides weren't working, the insecticides weren't working. The production of dry beans was actually threatened in New York at that point just by these pests, and it was declining soil health was what the final diagnosis of all this was. He planted 22 different, he asked an interesting question. He said, what would happen if we changed which crop preceded the dry beans? And he put in a random block experiment with 22 different species of other crops. At the end of the year, he plowed that and planted a very susceptible variety of dry beans. He found that some of the plots were worse, some of them were the same, some of them were a little better, and 2 of the plots had no disease. Now that was quite the breakthrough. So I'm running short on time. Does anyone have any burning questions they'd like to throw at me? So I'll go further. Go ahead. Okay, which crops? There were 2 crops. One was yellow mustard. And yellow mustard was an interesting study, actually was a really interesting discovery. When you take if you bite yellow mustard, the leaves, it's the same flavor that you get when you've got mustard for your hot dog. It's that sharpness. It's a material called glucosinolates. In the same leaf, in the same cell, this is what George figured out, there's an enzyme that'll cut the glucosinolate and it gives off a gas that's cyanide. When the mustard was turned in, it fumigated the soil. The fumigation biofumigated it and killed the diseases and the nematodes. And there's a lot of research was done building off that. One was the question is, what's it doing to the beneficials? And at Michigan State, they showed that this biofumigation was not really hurting the beneficials much. It was being very selective on the pathogenic species. Later in California, they found when methyl bromide was banned, that if you put brassica into the soil and let it biofumigate, it was as effective as methyl bromide, but didn't have all the negative environmental problems. Since then, they've refined it. They've gone to something called anaerobic deinfestation, where they put the glucosinolate-containing biomaterial in, cover it with plastic, and flood it. And they're able to just entirely clean the soil just as good as these nasty chemicals can. So I'm sorry I'm running short on time. I usually do a 4-hour lecture on, on these. So, any other quick last questions? Yes? The question is, am I optimistic? I'm extremely optimistic. And I'm going to add one more observation we found. I've been good friends with Dan Barber for 25 years, and he noticed something that the more, I found first in my observation that whenever we have a pest, the pest is actually a symptom of an imbalanced biology in our farming system, and that we can make that pest stop causing losses by further diversifying the system, bringing in the right form of diversity. Makes the pest stop being a pest. But Dan Barber pointed out, and he did side-by-side comparisons, that he could taste the more diverse system. And over, we tested him because I still remember saying, yeah, you're pulling my leg. But we could give him 2 samples of grain, one from a very diverse system, one from a non-diverse system, and he would pick out, he could tell me every time which one it was. So I'm very optimistic just because this works. I don't need a premium. I mean, I'll take it. But my costs are lower than the costs that I had when I was buying expensive inputs. And I would argue my yields are higher. than they were when I was using the off-farm inputs because I've got healthier plants. One other reason for optimism is I think there are markets out there, and next door at the Wegmans, they are selling a variety. The bread that they're baking is made with a variety of wheat that came from France that doesn't grow well in France anymore because their soil's not healthy enough. That variety of wheat is absolutely ecstatic to be on my farm, and it's growing well. And the flavor is selling all by itself. So sorry for running so long.
That was amazing. Can I have one more round of applause, please? Nobody better to follow Klaus than Tamer Malik, the founder of Drawdown Farms, who flew here from Pakistan and got here last night. And that's all I'm going to say. He's also all of our photographers' favorite person to photograph.
Hello, everybody. This fine afternoon. I hope everybody's doing very well. It's a pleasure to be back at Regenerative NYC, which is my favorite conference because it marries two of my greatest passions, Regen Ag and New York City, which is a city I used to belong to. Back in the day, I started my career on Wall Street. And I also studied in this school, I went to school, or college more like it, in this great city as well. So I'm going to be talking about the farming operation that I helped found, which was the pioneering regenerative farm in Pakistan. And we started this in 2016-17, before Regen Ag became the sexy buzzword of our time. And I used these exact words in front of the Prime Minister of Pakistan on Thursday, and somebody told me that you're probably the first person who's used the word sexy in an official meeting in front of the PM, and I was like, well, at least I'm a pioneer of something. So that was good stuff. It's been very intense and busy past many months, and that's because there's a growing recognition of Regen Ag. So we're doing some policy advisory work for the government, for the Ministry of Planning and Development, now with a new task force on ag innovation for the Prime Minister's office as well. But it all began with much humbler beginnings in 2016-17 when I was very worried about ag. And do we have a remote by any chance? How do we, is it this? Yeah, the green button, okay, fabulous. All right, so we're located in southern Punjab in the Thal Desert, that's Thal, and the Thal Desert is a very brittle environment, as the name would suggest. Being a desert, not a lot of rainfall. We are able to do agriculture there because of the fact that we have irrigation water, both groundwater, we pump some of that, and then we also have a canal that comes out of the Indus River, which is one of the oldest sort of river-based agricultural systems in the world. The Indus Valley civilization was built around it, and so we're very fortunate to have that ability as well. And the soils are extremely poor. We are in the, in an area where we have 0% organic matter, and you're going to see pictures of that going forward as well. We are. So the status quo is obviously very degenerative. All over Pakistan, the average organic matter is now at 0.3%. It used to be closer to like 0.7 and 1. It's now significantly gone down. The average is 0.3. Where we are located, it's basically 0%, so no organic matter. It's like beach sand, what we're operating in, which also means that there's virtually no or very low cation exchange capacity. So we cannot store water, we cannot store nutrients in the soil unless we build up, the stores of carbon. So carbon is actually a very valuable nutrient for crops, and that's something we've realized, and we've seen sort of, yield bumps and quality bumps, resilience bumps as we've enhanced soil organic matter as well. Yeah, and we have a heavy tilling operation, or status quo more like it, in Pakistan, which has also contributed to alkalizing soils tremendously. So we also have very calcareous and highly alkaline soils. And just a quick point about pH. pH is logarithmic, so the difference between 8.1 and 8.2 is actually quite massive. It's exponential. And, again, an ideal soil should be closer to a 7 pH. And soils in Pakistan have now crossed the 8 mark. They're about 8.2, 8.3. Those are usually the readings you get in Pakistani soils. They can be up as high as 8.5 even, which is, really, really bad, because it means that you have to over-apply fertilizers because the fertilizer usage efficiency is very, very low. And this is, again, something where Regen Ag is hugely helpful. So this is a picture that I like to share, which is, you can see what the soil is actually like. It's like beach sand, right? This is what it can turn into as we get into regenerative processes. This is a holistic brand grazing site on our farm, and 1 year into a regenerative transition, you can see that we've crossed maybe about 1.52% organic matter at least. And, that's visually sort of, you can see that with the sort of what I would like to call maybe a light dark chocolate, right? So maybe a 65% dark chocolate. And which, by the way, is a passion of mine, of one day maybe growing cacao somewhere and like actually having a really high quality regenerative dark chocolate brand. So, these are some of the principles of Regen Ag, which obviously everybody is more than aware of. We have what are usually called the 6 principles. And then, of course, there's how we manage soils and then how we manage plants as well. So providing the right nutrients at the right time in the right forms. Biostimulants are crucial, and I'll be touching a little bit on that front as well. What we are doing is systemic changes and regenerative amendment-based changes as well. So systemic means lowering tillage, animal integrations, cover crops. All of those are essential at building soils. Intercropping where possible, agroforestry where possible, and we're creating unique systems for different crops. We're a very diverse farming system, so we have orchards of mango and citrus. We grow large-scale sugarcane. We grow, other row crops, wheat, silage maize, fodder crops, or forage crops as they're called here, but also some high-value horticulture such as chilies, which we've recently begun as well. And regenerative amendments, we have the largest composting facility in Pakistan, the largest vermicomposting facility in Pakistan, all on our farm. We do bio-fermentation, so lots of different fermentation-based amendments. Biostimulants, some we make on farm. We also deploy a slew of biostimulants from all over the world. I just met a gentleman from Lithuania. One product we're very excited about is a sapropel-based biostimulant that is currently actually, we've done trials of it, and now we've gotten a much bigger batch from Lithuania, so it's actually being shipped to us. We use high-efficiency irrigation systems because we want to be good stewards of water, so that includes, of course, center pivots, impact sprinklers, drip irrigation, hose reels. So the sugarcane we grow, we did a university study trial to prove that we're using 75% to 80% less water than the status quo agriculture in Pakistan, which is entirely done via flood irrigation, which is extremely wasteful. So the global average of water usage for countries in agriculture is usually 70%. In Pakistan, that's up to 95%. So a large chunk of the water is wasted with the kind of systems that we have. You can start to see the pictures of soils transforming. That's in our orchard. The picture on your right and the picture on your left is actually also from an orchard, and you can see the soil transformation. This is an example of a hose reel based irrigation system. This is an example of a no-till planter from France, and you can see the soil color being transformed from what it used to be, and I'll show some satellite-based images of that as well. This is our composting operation. We do fungally dominant composts. We make 4 different types of composts on our farm. One is a fermentation-based compost as well, and then we also have a large compost tea operation, which converts those composts into liquid tea, which we deploy via our irrigation systems. That's a compost turner. That's a biochar making unit. So again, with biochar, there are lots of nuances, which I can't get into right now, on how we deploy them, but there are ways of doing biochar, and you should always enhance your biochar with nutrients and biology before deploying it. That's our vermicomposting operation, which this is an older picture. We have a very big, fairly big vermicomposting operation now, and it's hopefully getting bigger as well. And it's literally pure liquid gold. It allows us to dramatically reduce fertilizer usage while, significantly enhancing our crop performances. This is a fish hydrolysis that we make. This is our fermentation operation where we do different types of fermentations, including fish hydrolysis, but many others. This is our compost tea operation. This is an ag spray drone, which we recently acquired, and that we use for foliar applications that are strategically done at different times of the crop need, based on what sort of stage or critical point of influence the crop is in. And we have seen incredible results. Just with no-till, to give you an example, once we had no-till with maize under the same center pivot, we were doing the same Corteva Pioneer seed for maize, and we saw a 33% increase in yield just by going no-till. That was the only difference we did. This is early on, a few years ago, when we started shifting towards a no-till. This again, you can see in a grazing area, the soil is completely transformed from the kind of sand we used to have. This is also a picture of our grazing operation with our native cattle, which is the Bos indicus, which you can see with the hump on the back. So in the Zebu style or Bos indicus style cattle all over the world have a hump. We have goats, we have sheep. We strategically use what we have because we have an animal operation as well. So the sheep we used as a weeding tool in our sugarcane crop. So this is a sugarcane crop, and we used the sheep to weed. So they improved the soil while eating the weeds without eating the cane. We also did a trial. We don't have any camels, but there are lots of camels in the region owned by different sort of pastoralists, and we got them to bring the camels because it was a particularly pernicious weed that's not eaten by any other animal except for camels. And so instead of sort of, tilling before the crop that we were planting under center pivot, we got these camels to come in and graze it down. And they, of course, had a feast. And we, of course, got the free manure. So it was a nice win-win combination. We did some trials. So we're increasingly doing intercrops. So trying to get more out and strategic and synergistic, mutualistic intercrops. So we did a sunflower with sugarcane, and sunflower is a host species for mycorrhizal fungi, which are crucial. And actually, we now have studies that showcase that 50% of the carbon that is absorbed terrestrially is done because of mycorrhizal fungi. So it's an amazing gift of Mother Nature. And in our sugarcane, which we devote a significant sort of acreage to, usually about 250 acres of our farmland is used for sugarcane. We did this trial, and while we got the same yield for cane, in fact, actually, this provided more resilience against heat waves, which are increasingly becoming common in our part of the world. So we were able to get a better crop. We also got an additional income from the sunflower in the same amount of land, using the same amount of water, with just a small addition of fertilizer and nutrients, which again, we do regenerative enhancements in how we deploy our nutrients so that we don't get leaching, so that we are able to get much better absorption and uptake of those nutrients. Because the current paradigm status quo is very, degenerative, but also very wasteful, and we can reduce all the waste if we sort of take a regenerative paradigm for even sort of more chemical or synthetic nutrients, right? By ensconcing them in biology and sort of biological matters like humic substances and the right microbial inoculants, the right biostimulants. Another picture of the trial. Mushrooms started growing in the desert, right, which was unheard of and unseen before because you don't really see sort of mushroom fruiting bodies popping up in the desert. Sorry, let me go back. Somebody was trying to take a picture. And then we have lots of incredible biodiversity that has grown tremendously on the farm. We see these stunning butterflies, bird species that I'd never heard of before, and then I became an amateur ornithologist in the process of becoming a regenerative farmer, and that's one of the great treats of I think, doing farming in a way that's ecologically beneficial and enhances biodiversity. We have the largest honeybee in the world is the Apis dorsata, and the dorsata started building these huge hives all over in different parts of our farm because there's biodiversity there, there are flowers there for them to have enough nectar, and that again is a sign of an ecosystem that's hopefully sort of working and regenerating. Well, we all know about the BCG study that says that it takes 3 years to transition. Our view is very different. We believe that the study is not necessarily correct. While it can take that long to achieve a profitable transition, we believe that Regen Ag done right can get you the positive outcomes from crop number one. And of course, John Kempf, the legendary John Kempf, will be talking more about this tomorrow, and I'm very excited to hear his talk. He's also one of our mentors in our journey, and we believe that doing things the right way can give you, generate positive outcomes from a profitability and resilience point of view from crop number one. Just some pictures again to show you the land transformation and our farm. These are from our drone. You can start to see like the soil color is very different from the original sand. Again, this is a center pivot in between one crop before the next is planted. Again, an aerial shot of some of our fields. This is a wheat field. These are spring blooms, and of course, like any good brand and marketer, I chose like very beautiful cloudy days. This is a Google Maps image that I particularly am fond of, and this is the last slide. But you can see on CP1, Center Pivot 1 on the north there, which is right next to the canal as well, that we can see a soil transformation compared to what native soil is like. And you can see the small center pivot over there, CP3, center pivot 3, which has had the least time for soil transformation, and this is an older picture. But you can see the soil difference from more deep milk chocolate to basically or white chocolate, I guess, if you will. And that, I think, speaks to the power of the transition and the transformation that can happen for soils. And so I am very bullish on both the profitability and resilience that Regen Ag brings to farmers, but also the potential for enhancing biodiversity, for fixing the broken nitrogen and phosphorus cycles that we have, but also for sequestering boatloads of carbon in soils and helping reverse climate change. So that will be a wrap. And if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to ask. Thank you so much. Thank you to Tamer. Really, really happy to have him back. Now, it's been a long day. My guess is everyone's feeling a little tired, maybe, ready to be done. But I need you to hold on because this is the most fun panel that you're going to watch all day. Honestly, it's the most important. It's how we get regenerative alcohol mainstream. No. But I won't delay any further, and then we'll launch right into a happy hour afterwards. I'd like to welcome to the stage Anthony Corsaro from Regen Brands, Taylor Lanzit from Anytime Spirits, and Ivo Haramas from Gurgich Hills Estate Winery.
Only at this event can we go from grazing camels to regenerative booze, so that's a hell of a transition. Hey everybody, we know you're all ready to go have a drink, so we are prepared and ready to have a fun little conversation here. We'll do some really quick intros. My name is Anthony Corsaro. I run something called the Regen Brands Ecosystem. Right now that is a research and education nonprofit called the Regen Brands Institute, and also the first trade association for regenerative brands called the Regen Brands Coalition. And we also have a forthcoming investment piece as well called Regen Brands Capital. But ultimately, we created this new ecosystem to better support brands like the ones you're going to hear from today, because we felt like brands bringing truly identity-preserved, third-party validated regenerative products didn't have the marketplace support that they deserved. And we're going to talk about what that looks like really from a couple distinct journeys in the alcohol space. So Taylor, you want to do a quick intro as well?
Hi all, my name is Taylor. I'm the co-founder of Anytime. We're a regenerative and organic alcohol business. We make spirits and spritzes. Before this, I was sort of a supply chain nerd, geek. Name the company, I've probably done supply chain for them, but really focused on bringing sort of farm-based products to consumers. Head of supply chain at Dig and Restaurant Groups. I was a head protein and dairy buyer for a small burrito startup called Chipotle, and also was the head of strategic supply chain at Daily Harvest. So deep passion and love for actually making supply chain workable with really sort of farm-driven products.
Ivo?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ivo Jeremaz. I'm honored to be here with these incredible, gifted, and people with driven by passion. So I am involved in running a small family business. My late uncle was Mike Grgic, who came here as an immigrant from Yugoslavia to raise Croatia. He also brought me here in '86. And today I am running winery, and which is 100% estate, which means that everything that we produce, we own our land, and all vineyards, 5 vineyards that we own, are certified regenerative. We've been doing organic farming for over 20 years. So this is my daily job, but at night I dream about convincing everybody to start regenerative farming, and we'll talk about it a bit more.
And he also dreams about really cool suits, as you can see.
I do have a dinner with my marketing agency, and so at the end of the day, someone has to sell something or nothing moves, so I have to sell some wine tonight.
Well, let's set the table a little bit and just talk high level. I think a lot of people don't realize how impactful, alcohol could be in terms of regenerative agriculture adoption. So talk about how you both think about that, and Taylor, if you would kick us off.
Yeah. So my co-founder, Maddie, and I got into this specifically because the adult beverage alcohol space is a $2 trillion industry. Right? It is massive. By comparison, the organic food sector is $250 billion. So literally alcohol is 8 times the size of the organic industry as we know it. All alcohol, beer, wine, spirits are agricultural products, right? We have worked so hard to educate consumers about farm to table, but we often forget about what's behind that bar, right? You walk into some of the best farm to table Michelin star restaurants across the city, they are still serving commodity spirits and wine and products, right? So the real next revolution in better food is the bar. One of our favorite sort of like aspirational stats as a company is that Tito's last year, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Tito's, they did 12 million cases. If all of that was regenerative organic grain like we source, right, that would have been 600 million pounds of regenerative organic grain.
Wow.
It would have been close to 400,000 acres, right? Talk about low-hanging fruit, premium luxury spirits that already get a high price point in the market. We sit on shelf today for the same price as Tito's, and our farmer sets the price. We have a ROC certification, we have an organic certification, and we're a small brand. So, even if we don't introduce new drinkers, even if we don't necessarily grow the alcohol market, there is such an availability of today available drinkers.
I'm fortunate to be involved with a great winery, and since this is not my job, I love it. I work every day. I have 6 kids. They are grown up. My wife kicks me out on weekends to work in tasting room. So my goal is to talk to at least 150 people a week, which I'm kind of surpassing. And I barely talk about our wine and trying to sell the wine. Actually, when my uncle, 2 weeks before his passing, he was 101, still coming to the winery. And then I would roll him around, he couldn't even walk. And one time, he kind of angrily pulled me for my jacket. And I said, "Yes, Mike?" He said, "Ivo, you've been talking to these people for over 20 minutes. You never mentioned that we make or sell wine. Don't you know that we have to do that? You always talk about microbes and soil and stuff like that." So this is very beneficial to me, who I am very passionate about regenerative farming, and I talk to people, and how I reach them by talking that food is medicine, and who is not interested in healthy eating and health in period. Many people take it for granted, so I use ability to reach these people and to advantage to maybe 10%, my conversion rate is about 10%. So they promise that will really support regenerative farming and try to eat better.
Love it. We've talked a lot today about building consumer demand and educating consumers and engaging consumers. Would love to have you both just kind of talk about what that looks like for your brands, what that looks like in terms of just being in the alcoholic categories that you're in, but then also layering on the regenerative or the rock piece to that as well.
So for those of you that don't know, alcohol is regulated by the 3-tier system. So you can either be a supplier, you can be a distributor, or you could be the retailer, right? Be it a bar or restaurant. You can't be more than one, you're one of the categories. And so because of this, and because there are 50 states, every state is regulated different. So we anytime sell in 4 states, and that's really focused for us. Unlike emerging rock, regenerative, organic CPG brands that can throw up a website and start selling online, we can't do that, right? We can ship to some states, it still has to go through distribution, right? So it's really complicated for what we do. We have taken the approach that meeting customers in retail is probably the best way to do that. So we're the only core rock spirit in Whole Foods. They have a couple other limited LTO style products, but no one else can sort of be in their core set right now. And the easiest selling point
on sale right now too, right?
We are on sale. Yeah,
on
we're
sale. So
spring
go
promo.
get some. Okay.
Yeah, get it. And what's super exciting about that is it's so easy when someone comes up to us and I can look in their cart and I can see other organic products and they're shopping in the, to buy adult beverage and, I've actually, all of my dairy's organic and yet I've never thought about organic alcohol, right? It's just such an easy click moment. And that's the stickiest type of consumer for us, right? Somebody who's already bought into regen or bought into organic, where just that link of, wow, I've never considered if my bar cart is organic, or what does this mean? How does this grain work, right? And so we're just so motivated in that storytelling of spirits can be grain to glass. They can come from a single farm. They can tell the story of a farm, right? And be fully source identified products. And even more so if you're purchasing regenerative or organic, your bar cart can also match that.
Whole principle of creating great wine is so-called terroir, sense of place. And so this farming is exactly what we need. How can you talk about sense of place if using chemicals? There's more and more research that suggests that actually one component of high quality is your native yeast on your grapes. So in our winemaking, we just crush grapes, wait 3 days, and fermentation starts with hundreds of thousands different strains of yeast, not just one commercial yeast made in somebody's lab. So it is not hard to link quality of wine, and some people are willing to pay $1,000 for one bottle of wine and drink it and be happy about it. So it's a really a good way to promote this farming and show what we can do with it. In regenerative farming, what happens with plants, they produce a balance of phytochemicals, which are obviously responsible for wonderful flavors in our vegetables. Also, they produce great phenols and colors in our grapes. So we know that by using regenerative farming, we can enhance quality of our grapes, and then it works that way.
Talk to me about how you guys think about on-premise versus off-premise. And for those that don't know the industry lingo, think about getting a drink at a bar, which would be on-premise. You consume it on-premise. Off-premise would be you buy it at a retailer, you buy it at a grocery store or a liquor store, and how you see doing consumer education specifically around regenerative different in those two places for adult beverages.
Yeah, for us, we've focused so much on off-premise or retail, really trying to do demos and meet customers where they shop. Adult beverage has a lot of money, and the big brands pay to play, right? And so competing with them in certain spaces is really challenging when you're a small brand. We found some really exceptional small restaurants in New York, San Francisco, LA, that they'll put us on the menu and it'll say regenerative martini, right, farmhouse. And that's really where we can shine, where just to even see the word regenerative or organic in front of martini, in front of inlet, you name it, someone's like, oh, cool, I'll go for the organic, right? So that's where we've shined with very specific, partners who want, bar menus and beverage programs that celebrate that. And then off-premise, we've really we've really tried to figure out our sweet spot. All of a sudden now, the most important thing about us for many customers is that we're 100% grown in the U.S., distilled in the U.S., bottled in the U.S., right? We're a full American product. So many of our competitors import bulk liquid and they bottle it in the U.S. and can call it a U.S. product, right? And that is just due to really old regulation around how you label spirits and alcohol. And so for off-prem, that is sort of the message we're pushing, along with being sort of supporting American farmland. And if someone's excited, we get into sort of the regenerative organic nitty-gritty.
Love it.
It's confusing for many people, as we heard already, to figure out what's organic, biodynamic, regenerative, sustainable. You come to Napa Valley, there's a green, fish-friendly, frog-friendly, all this everybody's green. Everybody has green signs everywhere, so they are green. Lots of greenwashing. So even though I'm going to meet with our marketers, but they are not my favorite people. They spend lots of money and still there is no effect. So there's no better way to promote than one customer at a time. That's why I'm in tasting room every day. I do 30, 40 so-called dinners with winemaker. You go to a restaurant, good restaurant, they serve 5 fabulous dishes with your 5 wines. Then you meet 40, 50, 60 people, again, talk about farming, and it's a very slow process, but it's a grassroots process. There's no quick fix here, and so I personally, I don't know how many, maybe a few thousand people I reach every year, and I am a promoter of this farming and using our brand and using our product to further cause. Why am I doing this? Yes, I love it, but I have 6 kids from 19 to 32, and I wonder how they're going to make it next 50, 60, 70 years. So I'm fighting for them too, because I want them to live healthy lives, and there is research. People over 65 like me, I do care, but many people don't care about global warming and stuff like that. Younger people like you here deeply care. And I do care for my kids, so that motivates me to do this all travel and work.
Eva, I want to stay with you for a second. Talk about the ROC certification and why you all have embraced that, why you think it's important. You already mentioned greenwashing. There's, I think, viticulture, there's a lot of interesting kind of regenerative dialogue going on. So just how do you think about that, and why has your brand really gone that route?
So we've been certified CCOF, California Certified Organic Farm, for over 20 years, and then we've been certified biodynamic by Demeter for some years, and then my uncle got called from UC Davis professors telling him that he's going to ruin his reputation. We are doing this voodoo farming, so he asked me to drop certification. But we still do biodynamic farming, making preparations on our property. And then I discovered the regenerative farming in 2019 and embraced it. And we got certified in 2023 ROC. Certification is important because even though I try my best to meet as many people as possible, maybe it's 0.1% of people that drink our wine. They don't know exactly what we do. They haven't been in our farm. If you come to our vineyard, you don't need any certificate. You see what's going on. But I cannot get everybody there. So certification is important in that sense. Ultimately, this drives me nuts. My wife goes to Whole Foods, and with 6 kids, that's $800 bill at least, once a week. And then half of the, especially fruit, it's tasteless. So certified organic only means that hopefully you're not eating pesticides. But where are the flavors? So hopefully in near future we buy food on nutritional density, and so this is a difficult situation with certification. You kind of need it, but there got to be some other better way.
Yeah. Taylor, similar question to you, but I guess I would frame it as y'all are an emerging brand. You've just been around for a couple of years. You've launched many products in that time. You've marketed those products differently, and I'm sure learned a lot along the way. We've talked about some of it. How has that process been, just with the evolution of how you talk about and have regenerative, like on pack and with ROC certification as well?
Yeah, we've definitely learned a lot. We're celebrating our 2nd year in business, so we're young and youthful. we worked so hard to get our regenerative organic certification, and then like kind of had it small on the label, and it obviously took us like, you know, seeing it out in the world, like, what were we thinking? Like this, we're so proud of this, right? And it needs to be so much bigger. And is it distracting? What's going to pull the customer in, right? So there's definitely been this sort of evolution of how things look and how they're portrayed. When we're talking to someone or meeting someone, we're just telling them about our vision, right? Which is grain sheds can transform our soil and can transform our climate. And if we grow regenerative organic grains across this country, we will benefit from that. And so our vision is to have grain sheds and then have distilling and malting all within regions that can support local economies. And so when you're talking to someone about it, they're like, it's all in the bottle here? And I'm like, totally, right? But figuring out how to get that really nuanced message in a label that also looks good and maybe has like a little millennial moment going on. There's like a lot to do, and obviously a lot to figure out.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's about all the time we have. So last question for you both. Tell everybody about the products of yours that they're about to enjoy. Just quick little overview.
I believe we have a rosé tonight for your enjoyment. Unfortunately, I've already heard 3 times. I have to rush to meet with a couple journalists and my marketer, but I think there's plenty of wine.
I'll pull the room for you and make sure I get some feedback for you, bro. Don't worry.
And hopefully you find, if you taste a glass, passion and energy that this kind of farming puts into that bottle of wine.
Love it.
So we have Farmhouse Organic Gin, which is being served in a delicious cocktail. I do not know what the official cocktail is, but you'll see it over there. We also have our Farmhouse Vodka. That is also being served in a delicious cocktail. You can also try them solo. And then our Farmhouse Vodka is the base of our canned spritz. It's called Anytime Spritz. Tonight they're pouring spicy, salty grapefruit. So if you're like a spicy Paloma kind of energy, really recommend that one. And 5%, very sessionable, very light. Yeah.
Love it. Big round of applause for our 2 panelists, please. Court, Jackson, it's all yours.
Hey everyone, so just a quick heads up, we're going to open doors at 8:15 a.m. tomorrow. We have some wonderful cocktails. We have an entirely ROC cold brew. We have Moscow Mules, Southsides, those canned spirits, and then, canned cocktails. And then we also have a rosé, as you mentioned, and then some non-alcoholic beverages as well. Do you want to add anything?
Oh, no, I'm just trying to figure out these mics.
All right, well then it sounds like it's a wrap. Thank you everybody for first day. Look, see you tomorrow.
Thank you guys. Here, dude.
Oh, and of course, don't forget about the film festival that we're hosting. It'll kick off around 6:10 p.m. tonight. Thank you.